Okay, here's a somewhat unique and interesting article, and it goes along with a lot of the things that we've talked about just recently, some, and of course in the back machine if you've been with me. For we've talked recently about silver weapons and how that would work with a werewolf, right? And just why that is. Some people, just what is it? Well, the light of the full moon, and what has that got to do with everything? And there's sacred geometry and the size of the moon and the distance of it itself that has to do with that are shown in the videos that I've done about sacred geometry and so on, and how that works with silver, with wolves, with everything, and a connective. So it just makes sense if you know. And so that's why things were done a certain way. And that's one type of magic that you would have to have. For we talked about then, I don't want to go all Dungeons and Dragons-y, but whenever you have to fight a creature that's mythical, you have to have a special weapon. It has to be at least a +1 weapon, which means of the finest caliber. And there's usually something special about these weapons. They've been imbued with a certain gemstone that has sacred things put on it. It may be this the gemstone in the hilt and so on. But in doing so, it makes things happen. I thought about starting this with the Dungeons and Dragons game that I play, and using one of my guys that has a sword. He's got sparkles all over it and everything looks like lightning, and it's a vorpal weapon. It's an enchantment that he has on this weapon, and it gives you that effect or whatever. But there are magic things that you can have happen to swords. And we talk about magic of the ancients. We've gone through the ideals of Conan the Barbarian and where two snakes coming together and how that all works with the sword. And the riddle of steel has something to do with this also. So we're tying on a few connectives over here with our web and pulling a bunch of lines through this point as we talk about it, for it's just one magic that people used to do in a way that gave them an edge, that gave them that +1 that's been recorded in history. If you've heard about ancient Cuthbert swords and things that are made so well that they carried a mythology with them on and on and on. And when they find them to this day, that should have been rotted to dust long ago, and they were still some finely made, almost like a sterling or almost like a stainless steel effect where it did not rot and go away. Like the steel that's in King Tut's dagger that we talked about last year, that predates the Iron Age itself, but it's a form of steel, like comes down in meteorites from the stars, from the gods, by the gods, as they say. People call on certain powers to make certain magics happen. And this is just one form of it that I can show you, and one thing that we talked about magic before and what used to be magic back in the day. And how they pulled things off. It's in your Bible. When they go to Egypt, they try to out magic the guys when it first comes off, and they can do all of these things. They're pretty wicked too. There's all these magic people had back in the day. Some of it calls on your ancestors, calls on the gods, calls on certain essences, does things in a certain way. And I'll reveal a little bit of that to you, and then it's in the flavor of the way of the wording of the old that it was still there all along and people didn't really realize it. I guess it's kind of part of its mystique, but the Vikings unwittingly made their swords stronger by trying to imbibe them with spirits, with essence of the elders, with the people of the past life. They say they didn't know it, but the rituals of Iron Age Scandinavians turned their iron into steel. Instantly, I think about the thing that the ancient Egyptians said that their gods had bones of steel, but it was actually the metal from the sky that had come. And that might have something to do with what this shows here. This was back in 2 years ago now, but here we look at somebody of Iron Age, and they have this sword which has a fluting in the center of it, which helps during a puncture wound and to keep it open and stuff and to do bleeding and so on. And if you look close enough, even though he looks a little bit, oh, let's see if I can get any of the, I don't know if it'll get any lighter or not. Wow, that's about as light as I can get it. I can see it a lot better than it looks on the screen here to myself, but you can see chainmail here that's on this guy, and this protects you versus most things. And to me, this guy almost looks like Tom Huddleston, who is Loki. Yeah, he kind of has a profile of him looking at it. Let's get into this before I go off on what I was going to tell you about and make other connections. Iron Age Scandinavians only had access to poor quality iron. It's called bog iron a lot of times, which put them at a tactical disadvantage against their neighbors. So, back in the day, whoever had the best, and really with these Caucasians here that are fighting each other in ancient times as we're going back and forth, just a technological jump really helps somebody out. I mean, you may have archers and things going on and people that can throw spears, and they have it too, but if they develop a bow that can shoot much farther where you're still out of range with your weapons, it's a turkey shoot unless we do something else. And here come in other tactics, things start to happen. What if these people show up on horses? Oh, hell, we can tell that sure made a dent on everything. From the idea of Troy that we talked about all the way through Egypt and how it changed it and gave it some longevity here at the end of it. But those parade ponies, and we talked about horses with cowboys and people that got in things that are like chariots on wooden wheels and went west, and that had happened a long time before it happened in America in the wild, wild west that we thought about. But swords carried us all the way through to that time. In fact, people had sabers and swords all the way through that, the Alamo and all of that situation up on past. You could see it kept on from there for a few generations, and it just seemed to wane away. But up until that point, a sword was an important thing for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It meant something different. I'll tell you why. Because a lot of the derived weapons that we all had come from farming or hunting. Nothing was made for that purpose. It's different. Even all the weapons that you think of that go with the Oriental arts and everything, that has to do with farming implements and little scythes and things, and nunchucks are what they took and cut in two pieces, and it ended up two pair of nunchucks actually, but that used to hull rice. It's held together with a little chain and stuff, but that's two sticks of wood that's held together from there, and give it to somebody that's talented like Bruce Lee and knock the piss out of you. Because before they had taken all their other weapons, so all they were left was farming implements, and they still kicked that ass. Farming implements, though, go all the way back, scythes and things along that nature, but the shape of a scythe is actually imbibed inside of what we call a war axe. And we've talked recently, in fact at Christmas, talked about war axes and this labrid shape that really comes from a sacred knowledge from Wayback Machine of people knowing sacred geometry and the falling of seasons and how that draws its own labyrinth itself. And it's a secret in the stars, and they show it in symbols and stuff that goes way back and reaching on 10,000 BC and further back than that. I showed how the fact, and even that guy confirmed at that point, that that didn't seem like something that was brand new to you, did it? But in ancient times then, there were these elven type people, and there was this magic going on and all these things, but that was all carried into modern times and twisted in different derived forms of medicines come from ancient things that people knew back, and nobody knows how old that goes. Just people been doing that crap. How does a willow tree make aspirin? All these things that somehow people knew. But swords, see, an axe was used to chop down a tree, but a sword is a thing for a certain reason. In that game that I have Zariel, which is really Ariel of the Bible type, which is Gabriel type of thing, and the sword of Gabriel, well, this is a holy avenger, +5 type weapon that does this, this, and this, and casts light in the darkness and so on, but she's gone bad, and then we make her come back. It's really just a +5 weapon unless held in the hands of a paladin. If held in the hands of a paladin, it becomes something totally different. That's because that's a type of weapon that works with Crusades and Templars and everything that went along with it too. For sometimes you can have the most badass weapon in the world, but if you don't know how to wield it, or the riddle of steel, it doesn't all come together like Voltron, and you don't have the effect that you need. But you take a great warrior and you make a great weapon, and this makes all the difference. Like we talked about King Arthur and this sacred weapon that was there, but one rudimentary form, I guess, that you have in that, seeing that word on the page here, is that when he talks about pulling a sword from a stone, that goes back much more than somebody keeping a sword stuck in a stone, not like you think at all. For whenever you take ore and you drive it out through blacksmiths, and this ancient god of Festus and all this situation that was magic back in the day, just like we talked about making concrete recently and how magical that is. I can make mud into stone. I can turn it to stone. All these things we talk about, Merlin and all these things, look, there, it's magic. We have it today. There's incredible magic. I'm talking to you now via magic. It's incredible. Is it? Is it not? Sometimes in this magic that people created, there was different types of it, and some were the more stronger forms of it, the strongest of powers. You would call upon your ancestors in certain ways. This reveals that one point of which, to strengthen their swords, Smith used the bones of their dead ancestors and animals, hoping to transfer the spirit into their blades. Whenever I talk about all the ancient folklore that I went through back whenever I was younger, going through Dungeons and Dragons stuff, trying to find something neat to wahoo the whole thing about that had some basis on fact that somebody had said something about, and see if I could put it all together, I find stories about this where there was actually a person that was set off on a crusade type thing. And the first thing they had to do was bring them back the bones of one of their ancestors that was known to have been a great warrior. And that started the process. And they were going to call upon the bones of their ancestors to make it happen. In these D&D campaigns, you think, oh, you got to go kill this big old bear. Oh, everybody's scared of the bear. He lives up in whoop ass mountain, you know, and you've got to go to whoop ass mountain and try to kill the bear. There's another one that had to deal with making of a special blade for strength that gave the person extra strength, and it involved, well, people look at it different ways. It involved either whenever they would harden and fold the blade and do their thing to cool the blade, they would put it into a carcass of a dead bear or submerge it in its blood, which can make some sense here because you can get some carbon and things out of blood. And you think, why are they taking and using the bones of their dead ancestors and animals, hoping to transfer the spirits into their blades? How did they do that? Did they shake them like a shaman? Did they do? No, no, no. They put it into the steel itself. And this is an extreme verifier on that type of fact going on. You talk about spirit blades, or blades that are built for a purpose, or vengeance, or things along that line. And this is covered in that situation if you want. There's cursed blades. There's all kinds of things I could go into. And will eventually. I just don't want to bore the people that aren't all Dungeons and Dragons and stuff to death on these little terms that are probably not understood. But you understand what I'm talking about, and I'm sure you're going to get the gist of this. They go on to say they couldn't have known that in so doing, they actually were forging a rudimentary form of steel. That rudimentary form of steel is still famous today. People that went up against them, that before they went up against them called them barbarians, ended up backing out of the situation. A lot of things happened that went on here. The people and Vikings and things, they're all famous. They're famous for a lot of things. For some of these witches that used to make these potions and stuff that would heal people or do this other, would also make berserkers out of certain ones. I can do a whole separate video about that, but you mix some ephedra and a few other drugs and something that makes you where you don't feel any pain, and you get somebody all hopped up and excited, and you've seen those Vikings before, and you get somebody at that rage and at point, they just come right through you. They don't care, they don't feel pain, it just, yeah. Sometimes they had special weapons though. And this steel and things and swords and of old and all that. But they had formed a rudimentary form of steel. Now, science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke wrote that any sufficient advanced technology over others is indistinguishable from magic. And while we usually extend this to the future, the same was true in the past. In much of ancient history, the line between technology and ritual was thin. Oh, until they paganized everything that went on, as I've shown you so many, well, in thousands of videos now. That wall was not even paper thin, for it didn't even exist in most of its forms. Blacksmiths were something in between craftsmen and magicians, in possession of secret and esoteric knowledge, much like the Masons and their secret geometry and things that we're coming to find out now they had in ancient Egypt. And they had the ideal of the size of the earth and how much it's wider than it is tall, based on 432. But what has that got to do with everything? Yeah, that's a sacred geometry 2 number. If you've gone into any of my other videos or had any studies in it at all, you'll see that number along with the silver moon of 108 or 1080, which is 9. 108, 1 and 9 is 9. All of these things add up to 9. All of these different degrees and things. In fact, just the words we use to refer to the terms have to do so. In early Iron Age Scandinavia, for instance, just before the advent of the Viking Age, as we would call it today, Smith discovered a ritual that enabled them to impart the steely strength of their ancestors and animals in their weapons. And I'm guessing it went back a little farther than this, but after it became used due to a need, then it became more well known. And when we're looking back in the look back machine, we see it petering out. But went back a little further than they're probably willing to talk about here. It just becomes one of those things that you're looking through a mist and you go, I went back there. Well, did this type of imbibing go on with weapons and things before that? Yeah. And putting poison on weapons and so on like that. For one ritual that I saw that I talk about now here at a break second for, if you will, was that after a ceremony where a person was going to go back out, and apparently it was on a vengeance quest, and all the ritual was there, it still wasn't over. For what the witch did was she put a type of liquid by holding onto it with tongs, and you can't touch it, and rubbed it up and down his sword. And then she looked into his eyes and made sure he was paying damn good attention. And she told him that he cannot touch that sword until the deed is done, and after, only by the hilt. That he is not to stick it in his scabbard and get all this wiped off of it. That he is not to eat anything that he kills with this weapon, for it will kill him. And he understood, apparently. It's just left open like that, and you go, and you go, well, I don't know. They don't have anybody's name attached to it. It's just some bullshit, and they call this lady a witch. This was a crucial transformation for Scandinavians. The majority of the iron they had access to was bog iron. Bacteria in bogs oxidize trace amounts of iron to gain energy, and in doing so, concentrate the iron, enabling its collection for smithing. However, the resulting iron is impure and soft, which is a big problem for the Scandinavians. Conflicts could easily be decided by the side that had the better equipment, by just a little bit, and Iron Age Scandinavia was full of conflict. Either against the Romans, neighboring warlords, or Christian settlements, survival depended upon defending against conflict or engaging in it. Scandinavian smiths discovered that the bones of the dead could grant them an edge. Numerous forges scattered across Scandinavia contained the remains of animals and human bones, and by incorporating the remains of the dead, their spirits could be transferred into a blade, making it stronger and more durable. Now, people would mistake technology for magic, but then again, we talked about that and how that is the effect. There are still places on this earth that we could go with a modern technology that you think of as nothing today, with a flashlight and a lighter and a few other things, and make people think that you were God himself. Especially if you landed out of the sky. There's been cargo cults and things that go up out of it. But sometimes it's just a little edge. And magic, if you'll look back in some of the ancient tales of Egypt and all these other places, looked like they were trying to get an edge they could with it. Incorporating bones into the smithing process did in fact make Scandinavian swords stronger, but it wasn't magic. Or was it? It was technology. What ancient smiths could not have realized, or maybe they did, is that they were in fact mixing their bog iron with carbon to make a rudimentary form of steel. So carbonizing steel, like we now figured out how they had taken Damascus steel and folded it in doing so. But you look at the ancient thing and the way they're telling you to do it, it kind of works that way. And they were using animal bones that seem to matter, like bears and things that are strong, or somebody that's swift, or da da da, and your bones of your ancestor, and they were burning them up. So also we can tie with this ancient rituals of death that we talked about, where people put up on a dais and set a fire, like you saw in Anakin Skywalker and so on. But hold on, that goes back to, you saw that in Conan the Barbarian. And then when Valeria dies and he goes through that, there's a sword of vengeance. Well, he's using the same sword here, isn't he? They weren't used for that situation, but she was passed on that way. For other deities show that the birds and how they take it away. And this is, again, working with the idea of angels. And when you look at all the ancient people, they had that winged thing going on that all hooked up to it. Religious zealots might nowadays say that something like, oh, those are the bad angels and the good angels and everything. Yeah, you can make a story out of that, couldn't you? Let's continue. Carbon is present in all organic matter. We are made out of it. Everybody's freaking out about it now, and carbon dioxide is real bad, but we're made of carbon. Yeah, and the real good place that we're making a lot of it is it takes carbon and other molecules along with calcium make your bones and stuff. It's pretty strong, and whenever you die and you're gone, there's pretty much, that's what's left that you're able to do something with, and you have to work off of it. Strangely enough, let's talk about it here, but you have to make charcoal. So that is procured in a certain way, if you know, where you start it off and you bisque it and get it to a certain point and then utilize it. So make no bones about it, something that I say quite often, but actually, believe it or not, it supposedly comes from things like this. Where is it bad enough? Make no bones about it. You ain't going to dig up bones about it, are you? Some of you might have heard things along that line before, but carbon is in bones, of course, and concentrated. By burning bones in a low oxygen environment, ancient Smith would have produced bone coal, which is in the same way that burning wood in a low oxygen environment makes charcoal. Yeah. In fact, somebody said a long time ago that carbon had something to do with burnt bones from way back in the day, whenever they'd come up with it, and the alchemists and the way that they were working with steel rights and something and da da da. And does that have anything to do with char bones? Carbon? No, probably not. But carbon's pretty wicked too. You know, there's 6 atoms of each one, 666. It's got a whole connective that goes on with everything. But let's just step back in the door and talk about ancient swords of the ancients. Much in the same way that burning wood in a low oxygen environment makes charcoal, researchers have conducted experiments that recreate the process of forging a sword using bog iron and bone coal. The carbon from those bones can penetrate up to 3 millimeters into bog iron, enough to significantly strengthen the sword. And I bet you if you fold it back on itself like they did, and showing you where they have that rippling in there, that's so cool, that would fold it pretty much through itself. And then what if you're dipping it in blood and getting an effect off of that? Or the carcass of a bear. So, evidence of ritual smithing. The Sartimo sword was found in a Norwegian tomb. It dates to 500 AD. This sword would have been around the time the Smiths were using bone coal to strengthen their iron. So you wonder why sometimes these ancient mounds had been picked through and there ain't nobody in it anymore. And sometimes it's because they were used like this in rituals. I don't know how you feel about that. But here we go. While we have no written records of this process occurring, we do know that the remains of ancestors were highly sought after, and archaeologist Ingmarie back in Danielson writes, through the archaeological excavations, it is evident that burial mounds were opened shortly after their construction, anything from a few years to decades after their initial burial. Tarj Gansum has suggested that these re-excavations and mounds were for the purposeful retrieval of bones. In this way, ancestral power was literally appropriated for occasions such as carbonizing iron, where the bone coal was necessary ingredient. Bransalmo and Roth have interpreted these retrievals or re-excavations as the possible recovery of items with magical power and those associated with necromancy. So magic of the dead and all this thing, and so now we talk about necromancy. All of this got to be of the devil. Well, I tell you what, these people were thinking this was the most holy of anything whenever they were doing it. That they were taking the bones of their ancestors, and again, make no bones about it, whenever they were doing something like this, they were damn well meaning what they were intending to do. This wasn't some willy-nilly type of thing. You'd have to realize that they were giving some levity to the moment here. From all the bones found around the smithies, it's clear that the smith used bones in some capacity, and what's more, ritualistically, incorporating the bones of dead ancestors into smithing fits well into what we understand about the ancient smithing practices. Throughout the world's ancient cultures, the forge is seen as the female. Yeah, the forge, the hearth. We've talked about that in a few different videos too, in symbolism. And the smith was its metaphorical husband, working so. Weaponry and tools were birthed from forges rather than made, just like ships. By using the bones, the spirit of animals or humans, Scandinavian smiths were in a sense making a new being, or having an essence inside of it. So they talked about this, and then people, having magical weapons, and whenever other people tried to make this type of steel, and they were like, that's not it. It's not the same, because it's not it. And no matter what they did, it wouldn't be the same. Scandinavian smiths, though, were in sense making this new form or being. And whenever they say that, and this sword has life in it, and all of these type of things, and instantly I start thinking about, well, the best sword in D&D is really a dark sword, and people will say that you can take that to another level and go with obsidian and how sharp that it is, and it's that type of obsidian blade, but really it's based on Stormbringer, which is from Elric of Meldemonet. It's a old sci-fi writings by Moorcock, and got quite a few of them, and it's a real interesting type of thing too. Something that I read whenever I was younger, so but that's based on that. So but it had a life of itself. It talked to him. It started singing whenever it started killing people, and it got stronger and stronger and so on, like that. And these ancient tales of what would happen where these souls of the dead were feeding on the spirits alive, and there was life drinker. They would take the souls of people from them and so on, and these sacred weapons. And if you think that I'm talking only about paganistic stuff that's nothing to do with it, you're exactly wrong. Yes, 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 yes. Yes, things along the line of Excalibur and such a thing have to do with this. You wonder why the bones of saints and all these type of things were looked after and sought after and all this back in the day of doing things. And I'm not saying all of it, but some of it was for things like this, and what today somebody might categorize as necromancy, utilizing the dead in some way in a ritual. Others would say it's a form of ancestor veneration taken to a point. An ancient Scandinavian collection of poetry called the Poetic Edda, which I've talked about a few times here, described many swords that had names, some of which you might want to call had a spirit. Some could speak, sing, provide guidance, or cause misfortune to their wielder. While we can say that some confidence that the Scandinavian blades weren't excellent conversationalists necessarily, ancient smiths were in a sense filling them with life. That of a famous warrior, a powerful animal, or the wielder's own deceased ancestors, and in doing so they were making steel. And so there's a few related articles here, but so when you see something like the blue glowing blade in Lord of the Rings and how it was imbibed in some way to where it reacted whenever orcs got close, or this happened or that happened, or it was gave you extra damage versus a certain type of creature, they would do things that did that. You're going to go hunt wolves. Well, I make a potion of wolfbane and I put it all over your sword. Now, when you stab a wolf, you can do that. Or we can put silver nitrate on there. They have ways of driving silver nitrate too, by the way. So all of these things are going on with chemistry and alchemy and how it's all working together worked very well. For what I was talking about before was a poison that they were going to put on the blade. And she said, don't eat it if you kill anything. Not that you're going to try to kill anything but this guy, but say whatever goes down, and you do not want to eat whatever's been killed from this weapon. And also you wouldn't want to waste that poison that's there. So along with the fact that they might imbibe potions and get all hopped up doing so, they had special weapons that were made to a +1 standard here, to a magical standard, calling on the ancients, the elders. Yeah. It's pretty neat when you think about it and you put it all together and what it really was and what it really meant, but really did make magical type blades out of them somewhat. There are stories they went up against people with bronze still, and whenever they hacked into each other's blades, it took the bronze blade off. Flop! It's gone. Now you have stick. Made it unusable. Hacked at least halfway through it and gaping now. One more hit and it just starts leaning back. Bring. So powerful they could cut stone. But yet they had such an edge on them that they could hone onto them. Bet it could easily cut rope, things along that line. But some of the secret of this was that there was a magic or cursed weapon. Why? Because you'd get cut with it, and maybe sometimes wasn't so bad, but no matter what, the guy would die. Why? Because it's been imbibed with that poison. And those ancestors were after that ass too. Some of these were swords of vengeance. So they had magic weapons that could speak and sing and do everything. And yeah, well, no, that's in that elven type thing. Yeah, I've made the connections here long ago here in my deals. And even recently we keep rolling around through it because it's connected to all of this. Who the elves type people were. Used to live in the Middle East and coming over. And the brownies, maybe brown-eyed people that were here before, that they talk about Cheddar Man and the people that were those. But then there was the Tuatha Danann, and they were very fair, and the fairies and all how it had been twisted into a mythology we have now, and it all seems like, well, they kicked its ass and put it all in shape. Who? We. What? Yep. It's the way it worked. Together they kicked their own ass. How'd that work? It worked out pretty well, I'll say. It's why we're at the point we're at today. But this is just something that people probably don't think of whenever they talked about sacred weapons being forged by the gods and Hephaestus that did certain things and da-da-da, and they had extra powers to them. What are they talking about? Well, a lot of times there was a technological jump that was being faced on you. And you get that too far out of kilt and it just becomes, da from the gods. And that happened over and over again. We've talked about that with steel and how that goes back much further than recorded. Oh, well, the Iron Age starts here. When I was a kid, the Iron Age starts here. No, it's here. No, it's here. I recently had a guy get on my deals and get on my videos and, well, started off with him picking a little bit about one thing, but after chatting for a little bit, he's kind of miffed about what I pointed out to him, the fact that he's still teaching that shit from 1940 that wasn't even right then. On when this dating, do you talk about Göbekli Tepe? Do you talk about this? Do you talk about that? I told him to peruse my videos, and like a few of others that you've seen down in the comments that have been in academia, that they've learned a few things and they aren't freaking out. Hopefully, whenever they do disagree, they don't freak out. Magic of the ancients transferred into the blade. Carbon that's actually taken from your ancestors. So, you can think that's weird and everything, but actually it's imbibed with your ancestors' DNA type stuff in that blade. It's in there. So again, make no bones about it. Whenever people would go to this nth degree to make something, this was a blade they meant for a purpose, and they weren't playing around. In fact, they were not playing around for the lineage and the heritage of their ancestors. And on and on and so on. And so sometimes whenever I see these blades, I've got these books here about armory and all kinds of things, and I've shown some of them to you. Some of them are thick as hell with all kinds of pictures into them, and they show you 1,143 different types of pole arms and their intricacies for if they're pulling somebody off a horse, or if they're doing this, or you plant it in the ground and take somebody off a horse, or whatever you do with them. One of the things that really fascinated me was, how do you get magic out of any of this stuff that comes back from elder days? And here's one point of magic. We've talked about, I don't know, at least 20 of them here, if not more. And then if we go into astrotheological type magics, or just the fact that somebody would somehow know the outcome of something, or the answer in the riddle of a number series because they're so good at it, and you think, well, they didn't have that going on back in the day. The Sumerians, they started becoming farmers and agriculture, right? Not. No. They had calculus that's an incredible, easily formed form of calculus that works out really well as an abacus type form of calculus. I've got other videos about it, and there's PhD guys that are all over this that finally figured it out. Some of these tablets that are just rambling on with these huge, incredible numbers, that's what they're talking about. Sometimes they're tracking stars and planets. It's what? They're real accurate, too. So, and of course, it just comes up like popcorn. No, it doesn't come up like popcorn. It gets recorded finally in something that lasts. Something that's no longer an animal skin and so on, but it gets in clay tablets that baked and so on, and they're made to be kept for posterity. Like making a big pyramid. So even thousands and thousands of years later, people are still going, damn, these people had some shit going on. Well, no, they just kind of got together and figured how to cut you're right. And they just figured out how big the Earth was too, and they just figured out true north and zodiacal. They just yeah. We'll go into more of that here in a little bit, but tell me what you think about magicians of the Forge of the Gods. Like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy. We'll get on to more.